It was late September when I decided to take that hike. The time of year when the air starts to feel thinner and the woods begin to smell like cold dirt and dying leaves. I had been stressed for weeks and I thought a long hike alone would clear my head. Late September had always been my favorite time to be outdoors because it wasn't too cold yet. But the summer noise, tourists, families, weekend hikers, was gone. The trails were empty, quiet, and calm. I headed out early, a little after sunrise. The sky was pale and the sun was weak, half hidden behind a layer of thin gray clouds. The forest looked washed out, but still beautiful in that almost dead late autumn way. The trail I picked wasn't popular, which was exactly why I liked it. There were no cars at the trailhead when I parked. No voices, no footprints in the dirt. Just me and that long, winding path into the hills. The first hour was peaceful. The leaves were changing colors, and the ground was covered in a soft layer of orange and brown. The air had a bite to it, but it felt clean. I could hear the crunch of leaves under my boots and the faint sound of a stream somewhere deeper in the woods. Everything felt normal. Everything felt safe. But late September has this strange feeling in the woods, like the forest is half asleep but still watching you. I didn't notice that feeling until I got deeper into the trail, maybe 2 hours in, when the trees grew closer together and the wind had stopped completely. The forest went dead quiet. Not a single bird sound. Not a single branch moving. The deeper I went, the more still everything felt. I kept moving, but slowly. The trail narrowed and dipped downhill into a long gully lined with thick underbrush. The air got colder in there, so cold I could see my breath even though it wasn't winter yet. I tightened the straps on my pack and kept going. About halfway down the gully, I noticed something that made me stop. On the ground, not far off the trail, was a small pile of broken branches. Normally that wouldn't be strange, but the way they were stacked didn't look natural. They weren't scattered the way branches fall after a windstorm. They were arranged almost carefully, like someone had snapped and placed them there on purpose. A small, neat pile. 5 or 6 branches laid on top of each other. I tried to ignore it. Maybe someone was marking something. Maybe a hunter had set something up. I kept walking, but after a few yards, I noticed another pile on the opposite side of the path. Same shape, same number of branches, same careful stacking. That was when something cold settled in my stomach. I felt watched, even though I couldn't hear or see anyone. I kept moving, but faster than before. I didn't want to stop again until I reached the ridge, where the trees opened up and I could breathe without feeling boxed in. The trail there had loose gravel that crunched loudly under my boots. Normally the sound would annoy me, but right then it was weirdly comforting to hear anything at all. As I climbed, I saw more of those branch piles. Small ones, larger ones, some tucked behind trees, some out in the open. Every pile had the same number of branches. Every pile looked placed, not dropped. I felt like someone was trying to guide me or warn me or maybe track me. All 3 possibilities made my skin crawl. When I reached the ridge, the wind finally picked up again. It was sharp and cold, hitting my face hard enough to sting. The trail along the ridge was narrow and covered with loose stones. The drop on the side was steep, maybe 50 or 60 feet down into a thick mess of brush and fallen logs. I kept walking, hugging the safer side of the path. The sky darkened a little more, even though it wasn't supposed to rain that day. The clouds shifted in a way that made everything look dull and flat. I remember thinking how strange the light looked, like the sun had already set even though it was barely noon. Then I spotted something else up ahead, lying right on the trail. A glove, just one. A dark green hiking glove, wet with dew, the kind people wear in cold months. It looked brand new aside from a smear of dirt across the palm. I went to step over it, but I noticed something beside it that made me freeze. A footprint, not mine. It was deep, fresh, and wide. A heavy boot. The direction of the print wasn't forward. It was angled sideways toward the drop, like the person had turned suddenly, like they had been startled or interrupted. The gravel around the print was disturbed too, like someone had slipped. More gravel had slid down the slope, forming a thin trail of loose stones. I stepped closer and looked over the edge. Halfway down the slope, caught in a dead bush, was another glove. the matching one. It was hanging by the fingertips, barely holding onto the branches. That was when the fear really hit me, hard, all at once. The kind of fear that goes straight into your ribs and locks your breath in your chest. I didn't want to imagine what had happened to whoever dropped those gloves, but the image forced itself into my mind anyway. Someone slipping, tumbling, grabbing at anything they could, losing pieces of their gear on the way down. I tried to calm myself. Maybe they were fine. Maybe they climbed back up somewhere else. Maybe they got help. But the trail had been empty. There were no footprints coming back up. No signs of anyone climbing out. No handprints. No disturbed dirt. Nothing. Only fresh boot prints leading to the edge and then nothing else. I didn't want to be on that ridge anymore. The air felt wrong, like it was too thin, too cold, too quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like a warning. I started walking faster, almost jogging, but the gravel made it hard to move quickly without slipping. I kept my eyes straight ahead because every time I looked at the trees to my right or the drop to my left, I felt like something might move if I stared long enough. My chest felt tight the whole time. Then I heard something. Not loud, just a single sound. A rock sliding somewhere behind me. Slow, heavy, definite. My whole body froze for a split second before instinct took over and pushed me forward again. I didn't look back. Looking back felt like a mistake. I could hear my heartbeat louder than my footsteps. The wind cut across the ridge again, but this time it didn't feel natural. It felt like the world telling me to get out. I reached the end of the ridge and practically stumbled down the switchbacks that led deeper into the forest. The trail dropped fast, and soon I was surrounded by tall trees again. The light was dimmer now. The clouds were heavier. The whole forest felt drained of color. I didn't stop moving, not even once. My legs hurt, and my shoulders burned from the pack, but stopping felt unsafe. Every rustle made me flinch. Every shadow looked like something crouching or hiding. Eventually, I reached the part of the trail where I first saw the branch piles. Except now, in the dim light, they looked different. Some had been disturbed. Some looked freshly made. One pile had twice as many branches as before, stacked neatly like someone had added to it while I was farther up the trail. That was the moment I realized someone else had been on the trail with me that whole time. Not ahead, behind, tracking me, watching me, knowing where I had passed, step by step, and marking something after I moved on. I didn't know why. I still don't. I only know that I started running then. Really running. As fast as the mud and leaves would let me. I didn't care if I tripped. I didn't care if I tore something in my ankle or knee. I just needed to get out. When I finally saw the faint shape of my car through the thinning trees, I felt the biggest wave of relief I've ever felt in my life. My legs were shaking so badly I almost collapsed when I reached the parking area. I threw myself into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and locked it. Then I forced myself to look back at the trailhead. I didn't see anyone, but the trees looked darker, heavier, like they were hiding something just beyond where my eyes could reach. I started the engine and drove away without catching my breath. The further I got from the trail, the more surreal everything felt, like the fear was slowly peeling off my skin but leaving marks deep inside. When I got home that night, I kept thinking about those branch piles. Someone made them. Someone followed my route. Someone watched where I walked, marking the trail after I passed. And the worst part wasn't the footprints or the gloves or the fresh marks on the ridge. The worst part was knowing that whoever was out there never said a word, never made a sound, never let me see them. They were close enough to track every step I took, close enough to know exactly where I went, close enough to leave fresh signs behind me, but quiet enough that I never once caught them in the act. Late September used to be my favorite time of year to hike. Now it's the month I avoid the woods entirely, because I know someone else is out there in those forests as the season dies. Someone quiet, someone patient, someone who doesn't leave the woods when the weather changes, someone who watched me the entire time, and someone who, for a reason I'll never understand, let me leave. I decided to go hiking that morning because I needed to clear my mind. I had been feeling stuck for weeks, and the quiet usually helped me reset. I picked a trail I had never tried before, one that circled around a lake and climbed up into a forested ridge. On the map, it looked simple, nothing out of the ordinary. The forecast showed cool weather, light wind, no rain. It felt like a perfect day to be alone with my thoughts. The trail started wide and easy. The dirt felt slightly damp but not muddy, and the trees around the lake stood tall and thin, letting in enough sunlight to warm my face. The air smelled clean, like wet earth and pine. I walked at a relaxed pace, enjoying how quiet everything was. The only sounds were my footsteps and an occasional bird somewhere above me. Everything felt normal. After about 40 minutes, the trail veered away from the lake and led into the thicker part of the forest. The trees here grew closer together, blocking more light. The ground was covered in layers of old leaves that turned silent under my boots. I liked the dense forest because it made the world outside feel far away. I didn't feel nervous or uneasy yet. It was just another quiet hike. But the deeper I went, the more the trail narrowed. It wasn't anything I hadn't seen before, but something felt slightly off. The ground sloped more sharply than I expected, and some parts of the path were broken up by small roots and fallen branches. I stepped carefully, knowing one wrong move could twist an ankle. I kept walking uphill for a long time, long enough that I started to feel sweat building under my jacket even in the cold air. I stopped to drink water and looked around. The trees stood tightly packed, their trunks straight and pale. I didn't hear birds anymore. I didn't hear anything at all. Even the wind felt trapped somewhere far above the canopy. The silence around me felt thicker than usual. I tried to shake the feeling off, telling myself I was imagining it. When I continued walking, something small caught my attention. A boot print in the dirt. Just one. It was fresh enough to be clear, but I didn't see any others near it. It looked like someone had stepped there recently, but the prints didn't continue down the trail. That bothered me, but I told myself maybe the person had stepped off the path or the other prints had faded. I kept going. About 20 minutes later, the trail forked. That confused me because the map had shown only one solid trail. Both paths looked similar, narrow, steep, and covered in dry leaves. There were no signs, no arrows, nothing scratched onto trees, nothing to help me choose. I stood there for a long moment, breathing slowly, trying to decide which way made more sense. The left path climbed uphill, while the right one went flatter and curved around a cluster of thick trees. Something about the right path felt more natural, so I followed it. At first it seemed like a good choice, but then it slowly changed. The ground became soft in places, almost spongy, like the dirt underneath was soaked even though the surface looked dry. The trees leaned in closer than before, their branches twisting together like they'd grown fighting for space. I walked slower, checking my footing. Then I saw something that made my stomach tighten. Another boot print. This time deeper, facing downhill, almost like the person had been moving quickly, maybe even running. Again, it was alone. Just one clear print. No others before it or after it. I hesitated. The air around me felt colder, even though the sunlight still touched the tops of the trees. The forest had grown too quiet again. I felt the kind of alertness you get when you know something isn't right but can't explain why. I didn't want to turn back, but I didn't want to go forward either. I stood still for almost a full minute. I eventually kept walking because turning around felt like admitting I was lost. But deep down, I already knew something was wrong. The trail slowly dissolved into uneven ground. I could barely tell where the path ended and the forest began. Old logs lay scattered in strange angles, almost like they had been placed there instead of falling naturally. Some of them had deep grooves in them, like something heavy had been dragged across. I tried not to let my mind imagine scenarios. I forced myself to stay focused. The forest got darker even though it was still daytime. The light filtering through the canopy looked weaker, almost gray. The air felt still and heavy. When I exhaled, the sound felt too loud. I tried to steady my breathing. After a while, I reached a slope going sharply downhill. The ground looked loose, but I didn't have another direction to go. I dug my heels in and took slow, careful steps, grabbing at tree trunks and branches for balance. A couple of times my foot slid, but I managed to catch myself. My heartbeat thudded in my chest, loud enough that it felt like part of the silence. When I reached the bottom, I found myself in a part of the forest that looked wrong. The trees were thicker, older, and their bark looked cracked and dark, almost burned. The ground was littered with branches, but they weren't rotten. They snapped clean under my boots. There were no signs of animals anywhere. No tracks, no droppings, not even birds overhead. It was like nothing alive wanted to be here. The air smelled faintly metallic, like damp iron. I didn't understand why. I tried to find any sense of direction, but the forest looked the same in all directions. The sunlight was blocked almost completely now, and the silence pressed against my ears. I felt like I was deep underground even though I was surrounded by trees. My steps grew faster as panic quietly worked its way in. The ground sloped again, this time gently, and I followed it because downhill usually leads to water or a clearing. I kept pushing branches aside, feeling them scrape against my sleeves. My breath stayed short and quick, and I could hear it echoing in my head. Then I heard something behind me, not footsteps, not breathing, just a quick shift of leaves, like something brushing past them. I stopped instantly, my whole body tensed. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see anything. I waited, listening so hard that my temples ached. Nothing followed, but something had moved. I knew it had. I forced myself to keep walking. The forest finally thinned a little, and I saw a faint line of open space between the trees. My heart lifted slightly. I pushed forward until I stepped into a long, narrow clearing with short, dead grass. It looked like an old service road, grown over but still noticeable. The moment I saw it, I knew it was my best chance out. I followed it downhill, limping a little from how tense my legs had become. The road curved several times, and each curve made the pit in my stomach tighten in case something waited around the bend. But each time, it was just more overgrown dirt, more broken branches, more silence. Finally, the trees opened up completely, and I saw something ahead, a weathered metal gate lying half-collapsed on the ground. Next to it was a rusted sign frame with no actual sign left on it. Beyond it was a wider path, clearly a real road that hadn't been maintained in years but still recognizable. My chest loosened for the first time in what felt like hours. I walked as quickly as I could, following the road until I saw power lines above the treetops. That was the moment I knew I wasn't trapped anymore. Power lines mean maintenance routes. Maintenance routes lead somewhere reachable. It took me over an hour to reach anything familiar, and by the time I saw the first distant roofline of a cabin far down the road, I felt like my entire body had been buzzing with nerves for too long. When I finally reached a main road, I just stood there, breathing hard, letting the normal world slowly return to me. Later, at home, I checked updated maps more carefully. The fork in the trail wasn't supposed to exist. The right path I followed had once been part of an old logging route closed off more than a decade ago. Landslides, animal hazards, unstable ground, all the reasons no one used that route anymore. The boot prints I saw must have been from someone who had wandered off trail like I did, maybe exploring or maybe lost. Maybe they turned back, maybe they didn't. Nothing supernatural happened to me that day. The forest didn't whisper, and no creature followed me with glowing eyes. But the fear I felt was real because everything that happened could happen to anyone. The silence, the vanishing trail, the sense of being somewhere people weren't meant to walk anymore. The simple fact that one wrong turn was enough to push me into a place the world had quietly abandoned. I learned something important that day. You don't need monsters in the woods to feel hunted. Sometimes getting lost is enough. Sometimes the forest itself, empty, forgotten, untouched, becomes the thing that scares you. And the worst part is knowing it can happen again, even on a normal day, even on a normal trail, just because you trusted the wrong direction for a few seconds too long. I went hiking that day because I felt like my mind was getting too loud. Work had been eating me alive, and I needed a break from everything. I chose a trail I hadn't tried before. Some route people online said had great views but wasn't too crowded. That sounded perfect to me. The trail wasn't far from my town, tucked behind a long stretch of old logging roads. I left early in the morning when the air was cold enough to make my fingers stiff. The first part of the trail was wide and easy to follow. Tall pines stood on both sides, their branches forming a loose tunnel that let just enough sunlight in to warm my face. I liked the crunch of frost under my boots, steady and calming. For a while, the world felt simple. No cars, no people, just the steady rhythm of walking. After about half an hour, the trail started climbing uphill. The trees grew closer together, and the light faded a little. I didn't mind the dimness. It made everything feel quieter. The ground became uneven, covered in a mix of loose rocks and tangled roots. I had to watch every step, making sure I didn't twist an ankle. I wasn't in a rush. I just wanted to breathe and feel like I was doing something real. But the deeper I moved into the forest, the more I noticed how still everything was. I didn't hear birds anymore, no insects buzzing, no rustle of small animals in the bushes, just my own footsteps and my breathing. Normally you hear something out there, even in the cold. That silence made my shoulders tighten a bit, but I tried to ignore it. After a while, the trail curved sharply to the left, and that's when I saw something that made me pause. A tree had fallen across the path. It wasn't huge, but it looked recent, the inside of the trunk still pale and freshly split. I stepped over it carefully. On the other side, the trail looked less maintained than before, like fewer people had walked it. The dirt was smooth in places where there should have been footprints or marks. It bothered me a little, but I kept going. Then I noticed something else, boot prints. Just two, deep and sharp, pointing forward. They looked fresh, maybe from the same morning. But there were no other prints behind them or ahead of them. Just those two. It was strange, but maybe the ground had been disturbed or the wind had erased the rest. Still, it stuck in my mind. I walked another 10 minutes before the trail split without warning. One path went straight, climbing more steeply up the ridge. The other bent downhill, narrower and darker, almost swallowed by trees. I checked my map, but it didn't show a split. The trail was supposed to be one route all the way up. No forks, no side paths. The map wasn't detailed enough to help me choose. I looked at both options for a while. The uphill one looked rough and rocky. The downhill one looked smoother, but something about it bothered me. Maybe it was the darkness under the trees. Maybe it was how quiet it felt. But the downhill path also looked more worn, like it had been used more often. I figured that meant it was the real trail, so I followed it. The change was subtle at first. The ground felt softer. The trees leaned closer. The air felt colder. But after a few minutes, the path narrowed so much that branches brushed my jacket on both sides. The dirt under my boots had that strange spongy feeling, like it held water beneath it even though everything looked dry. I kept walking, but my pace slowed. The forest around me grew darker even though the sun should have been getting higher in the sky. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made a mistake and entered a part of the woods people didn't come to anymore. Then the ground suddenly dipped, and I had to grab a branch to steady myself. The dirt slid under my boots as I tried to get down the slope without falling. When I reached the bottom, I found myself in a place that didn't look like a hiking trail at all. The trees were thicker and older than the ones above. Their trunks twisted in weird shapes, dark and rough, as if they had been hit by storms long ago. There were no signs of footprints, no trail markers, no evidence anyone had been here in years. I turned slowly, scanning the forest. Everything looked the same in every direction. Dark trunks, tangled branches, soft dirt. A wave of cold ran through my chest. I realized I didn't know which way I had come from. The slope behind me looked like the rest of the forest, and the path I thought I had been on didn't look like a path anymore. I took a few steps backward to calm myself, and that's when I heard it. A single rustle somewhere behind me. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was just a light shift, like something brushing against dry leaves. Could have been a rabbit or a squirrel, but the fact that I hadn't heard anything alive for over an hour made the sound hit me like a jolt. I stood completely still, listening. My heartbeat thumped in my ears. I didn't move for almost a minute. Nothing made another sound. I forced myself to breathe and started walking downhill, hoping it would lead to a clearing or water source or some kind of logging access road. I didn't want to turn around. I didn't want to walk toward the sound. I kept moving at a steady pace, trying not to look back. The forest grew even darker as I descended. The branches overhead blocked more light. My boots sank into patches of soft dirt that looked solid until my weight settled on them. I used tree trunks for balance, my hands getting cold from touching the rough bark. I walked for what felt like a long time, though I wasn't sure how long. My sense of direction got messy, and I kept hearing tiny sounds behind me every now and then. Not footsteps, not breathing, just soft shifting, like dry leaves being touched. I told myself it was the wind, but the air felt still. Eventually, the forest opened into a narrow strip of clearing, an old, overgrown road. The dirt was packed differently than the forest floor, and the grass there was short and dead. Relief washed through me. Roads meant direction. Roads meant escape. I followed the road downhill, ignoring the aches in my legs. A few times I swore I heard faint movement behind me again, but I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see anything. I just kept walking. After a long stretch, the trees thinned out and I saw something lying across the path ahead. A rusted metal gate, bent in the middle, barely hanging from its broken hinges. Behind it stood an old wooden signpost with no sign left on it. It looked like it had been forgotten for decades. Beyond that gate, I saw a narrow paved road. The sight of pavement felt unreal after the maze of silent forest I had just come through. I stepped over the broken gate carefully and walked onto the cracked asphalt. The open space around the road felt like the first deep breath I'd taken all day. I followed the road until I saw power lines stretching above the trees. That was the moment I knew I was safe. Power lines meant maintenance routes, and maintenance routes meant civilization. When I finally reached a small pull-off area with a trash bin and an old map board, I felt every muscle in my body loosen. Later, when I got home, I looked up the area more carefully. The split in the trail wasn't supposed to be there. The path I took downhill wasn't a hiking trail at all. It had once been an old logging route that was closed after multiple accidents and landslides. Most of it wasn't even listed on modern maps anymore. The forest had been slowly reclaiming it for years. The boot prints I saw earlier made sense then. Someone had gone down there recently enough to leave a mark, but not enough to leave a trail. Maybe they turned back. Maybe they got out the same way I did. Or maybe they forced their way uphill and found the real trail again. Either way, I understood something important. The forest doesn't need anything supernatural to become terrifying. All it takes is one wrong turn, one hidden path, one moment where you trust the wrong direction. The fear comes from knowing how easily you can disappear into a place that doesn't care if you make it out or not. And the worst part is how quietly it happens. How slow the panic grows. How the silence becomes heavier the deeper you walk. How normal everything looks until suddenly it doesn't. That day taught me that being alone in the woods isn't scary because of monsters or legends. It's scary because sometimes the forest simply has no reason to help you find your way back. I always liked hiking alone because it cleared my head, and for most of my life I felt more comfortable in the woods than in crowded places. I trusted my legs, my instincts, and my ability to stay calm. But the hike I took early last winter made me realize how quickly a normal day can turn into something that feels like a slow, silent trap. Nothing supernatural happened. Nothing impossible. It was all things that could happen to anyone, and that made it so much worse. The place I chose was a long trail that cut across the side of a mountain range not far from where I lived. It wasn't famous or popular, and most people only went there in summer. But the weather had been dry for a couple of weeks, and the cold felt manageable, so I thought it would be a good way to spend the day. I packed a light bag with water, a sandwich, a small flashlight, and a cheap emergency blanket. I left early in the morning when the air was cold enough to bite my nose. The first hour of the hike felt normal. The sun stayed low behind the trees, giving the woods a soft, gray tone. Frost covered the ground in patches, and every step made a thin, crunching sound. I breathed in slow, steady breaths, enjoying the kind of silence you can only get far from towns and cars. The ground sloped gently upward, and the trail was wide enough that I never had to stop to figure out where I was going. As I moved deeper into the forest, the trail narrowed as expected. The trees grew closer together, and the branches kept brushing against my arms. A few times I had to stop and climb over fallen logs. Nothing seemed unusual. It felt like any other winter morning. But small things started bothering me after a while. I noticed the air getting colder even though the sun was rising. I also noticed that the trail looked a little less used than it should have been. The frost on the ground wasn't disturbed. No footprints, no broken leaves, nothing that suggested anyone had been there in days. Normally that wouldn't matter, but for some reason it made me feel like I was walking deeper into a place that people didn't come to very often. I kept going anyway, telling myself I was overthinking it. I had checked maps. I had checked the weather. I had done everything right. There was no real danger. But later, around midday, something changed. The trail split in two. I thought I remembered from the map that there was supposed to be only one main path the whole way. Maybe a small side trail existed, but the second path in front of me looked almost as wide as the first. Both were covered in the same frost. Both disappeared into thick trees. There were no signs, no markers, nothing to help me decide. I stood there for a moment. The forest felt too quiet. The wind stopped completely, and I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I picked the right path because it looked like it descended a bit, and normally trails tend to go downhill toward the middle section. I walked slowly at first, waiting to see something familiar, but instead, the trees started changing. They were closer together, darker, taller, and the ground grew uneven. Roots twisted across the dirt like ropes, and I had to watch every step so I wouldn't fall. I kept telling myself I'd reconnect with the main trail soon, but I didn't. Instead, the path got narrower. The air felt colder again. The silence grew heavier. At one point, I heard something far behind me. Not footsteps, more like a quick scrape or something brushing against the ground. I froze and stayed still for almost a full minute. Nothing moved. Nothing followed. When I finally took another step, the bushes beside me rustled even though there was no wind. My mind told me it was probably an animal, a small one, a rabbit or something, but the timing made my shoulders tighten. I kept walking faster without turning around. After maybe 30 minutes, the trail suddenly opened into a small clearing. The space was empty except for a broken wooden structure near the edge. At first I thought it was a fallen tree, but when I got closer, I realized it was an old signpost. The sign itself had rotted away, and only a splintered frame remained. Whatever it once said was long gone. I felt a knot forming in my stomach. This wasn't a trail people used anymore. I thought about turning back immediately, but the path behind me now felt almost threatening. The woods looked thicker than before, and the air carried that same cold, metal-like smell that didn't belong in a forest. I knew I needed to stay logical, so I took a slow breath, looked around the clearing, and tried to find any sign of a direction. There was only one other way out, a narrow, almost hidden path leading downhill. I didn't want to take it, but staying put made no sense. Going back alone through a forest that suddenly felt like it was shifting around me didn't feel much better. So I went downhill, choosing the direction that at least felt like it might lead toward lower ground where roads or rivers usually were. The slope became steeper than I expected. Loose dirt slid under my boots, and I had to lean back and grab roots to stay balanced. The trees grew so close together that some parts of the path felt like squeezing through a cage. The temperature kept dropping, and the cold wrapped around my fingers even through my gloves. Then I slipped. My foot sank into a soft patch of dirt that looked solid. My ankle twisted sharply before I caught myself on a branch. Pain shot up my leg. I stood there breathing hard, waiting for the ache to settle. It didn't go away completely, but it wasn't broken. I could still walk, just more carefully. That fall made my stress spike. Getting stuck out here with an injury would have turned a scary day into a life-or-death situation. I had to keep my mind steady. Step by step, I moved down the slope until the ground finally leveled out. The forest here looked even older. The trunks were thicker, the branches tangled. Moss and old leaves covered everything. There was barely any light getting through because the trees grew so close together. My breathing echoed in my ears, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something moving. But there was nothing, just the same quiet that felt too thick to be normal. I walked for what felt like hours, but it was probably less. The path curved left, then right, then dipped again. My legs were sore, and my ankle hurt with every step. I felt tired in a way that made me angry with myself. I had planned a simple day, nothing extreme. I shouldn't have ended up here. Finally, the woods thinned slightly, and I spotted something that made my heart jump. The faint outline of tire tracks in the dirt. A service road. Old, unused, half covered in leaves, but still a road. Relief hit me so hard that my knees almost buckled. I followed the tracks without hesitation, keeping my eyes on the pattern in the dirt so I wouldn't lose it. The road twisted between trees and dipped around a ridge. I walked faster despite the pain in my ankle. The sky finally grew brighter as the trees opened up. Not clear or sunny, just slightly less dark. I didn't care. The road widened enough that I felt like I could breathe again. After a long stretch, I saw something gray through the trees. A cabin. Abandoned. The windows were broken, and the door hung slightly open. The wood looked weathered and dark from years of rain and sun. But behind it, further down the hill, I saw something far more important. A real road, paved, cracked but still usable. That gave me the push I needed. I didn't stop at the cabin. I didn't look inside. I didn't want to risk finding anything that would slow me down or make me overthink. I kept following the dirt road until my boots hit the pavement. The moment my foot stepped on that cold, cracked asphalt, I felt the weight in my chest lift. I kept walking until I reached an intersection, and from there I recognized a distant landmark. It took another hour before I saw the first passing vehicle, and eventually I got back home. Later, after checking old maps and digging deeper, I learned something important. That entire lower section of forest had been closed off years ago after multiple landslides made the area unsafe. The signs had been removed or rotted away. The split in the trail wasn't supposed to be there. The right path I chose wasn't a trail at all. It was the start of an old forestry access route that hadn't been maintained in decades. The clearing with the broken signpost had once been a junction point. The cabin was used by surveyors long before I ever started hiking. Nothing paranormal happened to me. Nothing chased me. Nothing tried to scare me. What scared me was how easy it was to walk off a safe trail without even realizing it. One wrong turn was all it took. One small decision. And after that, everything that followed, the silence, the cold, the strange terrain, the sense of being trapped. All of it came from the simple truth that I was in a place where people no longer went. A place where no one would have found me if I had slipped a little harder, twisted my ankle a little worse, or run out of daylight completely. The forest didn't need to be haunted to feel dangerous. It just needed to be forgotten.